As we got into 2023, my old friend and long-standing clarinet-playing colleague Ian Mitchell came over here for lunch so that I could interview him for the Clarinet and Saxophone Society magazine, all about his pioneering career. And the magazine wanted a few bits of information to kind of set up the article. So Ian sent me a top and a tail. And here's what he wrote to introduce how he got into clarinet playing in the first place. Aged 5, Ian Mitchell, on holiday at Great Yarmouth, was taken to a show on the pier. A man came on, playing a black thing, apparently a clarinet. Took off the bottom bit, played, took off the next bit, etc., until he was just playing the top bit. Ian was totally hooked. Aged 10, his hands were big enough, so he started lessons with the characterful Glaswegian Jock McLean. Memorable stories. When free lessons came at school into the West Riding, Julian Hall, a student of Sydney Fell, recently out of the Royal College of Music, became the local peripatetic. Then it was the Royal Academy of Music with Alan Hacker, a Reginald Kell student. Then out into the big wide world with his clarinet and bass clarinet, and occasionally his alto saxophone. Now, 65 years later, he decided he had to put his clarinets away. However, he is still far from retired. So, Margaret Archibald, that's me, invited Ian to remember some highlights of his pioneering career. I started by asking how he had come to commission so many new pieces of music.
Oh, goodness. Well, it started when I was at the Academy, actually, as a student. Started with the bass clarinet. I think that was one of the first commissions. I got a bass clarinet in 1968, and I can tell you a little story if you want.
Go on. Yes.
Yeah. I was a student of Alan Hacker at the Academy, and because he was in a wheelchair, he quite often taught at home. So I went down for a lesson at his house in Battersea, and when I went in, instead of saying, "Oh, get your clarinet out," he said, "Oh, listen to this." And he had in those days an LP sent him from the States, and he put it on, and it was a guy called Eric Dolphy playing unaccompanied jazz bass clarinet, a piece called God Bless the Child, which became a sort of iconic bass clarinet piece. And being a northern lad, I hadn't actually seen a bass clarinet before, and I played one. And I got hooked on this, and then managed to get one about a year later, in 1968. The story of that was that got home over the summer and said to my dad, "I want to buy a bass clarinet, but I have no money." So he looked, and he didn't have any money either. So he found this trust that said that it helped students buy instruments. And I thought this was great. So he and I wrote off, and they wrote back saying, "Terribly sorry, but this is medical instruments." I went back to the Academy after the summer, and I said to Alan, I've been trying to raise some money, and we got this. I thought it was quite a funny story. So Alan must have gone to the principal, who was Sir Thomas or Tommy Armstrong, and I didn't know this. And a while later, Tommy Armstrong would walk around the Academy in his cardigan with holes in the sleeves and in his slippers. And he said, "Oh boy, come here." Oh goodness, what have I done? And he sort of dragged me into his office and said, "Here you are." And I said, "Oh, thank you." And I opened this envelope, and there was a cheque for £50.
Wow.
And he had written to this charity,
Yes.
saying, "This student wanted money for an instrument,
Yes.
but you said you only do medical, but you didn't specify." I don't know what he said, but anyway, this charity, so this medical instruments charity, sent me 50 quid for a bass clarinet.
Wow.
And in those days, in 1968, 50 quid was a lot of money.
Yes.
And Alan said, "Well, Rudel Cart are bringing in these instruments from Germany, Boehm system, and they cost £208. 50 quid was a quarter of that, pretty well.
Yes.
And I bought one, made by Murney.
Yes.
And I was pretty well I think I was the only student at the academy who had a bass clarinet.
Oh, wow.
And I was hooked on it. And so my friends, Michael Bartley was one of my mates, and I got him to write a piece for 3 players, E-flat for me and 2 mates, E-flat, clarinet, B-flat and bass. And we did it at an academy concert. Bruce Cole was a friend of mine at the academy as well, composition student, and got him to write me a piece, and he wrote it for clarinet, doubling bass clarinet, and I did that in my Wigmore Hall debut, as they call it. And Janet Graham wrote me a piece, or 3 pieces, for bass clarinet and piano, which I did a lot and actually eventually broadcast for the BBC. So it started out at the academy. And I, pretty soon after leaving the academy, met up with Peter Weigel. That's a bit of a long story, and he formed Gemini, and I was a founder member of that. And Gemini started commissioning a lot of stuff, and I realised this is sort of what you do basically. And so I started commissioning bits and bobs myself from friends. And then when I took over Gemini from Peter, we started in 1974, and he left in 85 and I took over. I started commissioning seriously for Gemini. And one of the things I decided to do was that pretty well every commission we did would have bass clarinet, rather than, if you wanted to write a piece for Gemini, would you write for bass clarinet as well as, or instead of clarinet?
Yeah.
And over the years, I've commissioned nearly 50 works for bass clarinet, from solo works to 8-part works. And I've also commissioned quite a lot of clarinet pieces, pieces that people have written for me. So I don't know, I've lost count, really. I kept account of the bass clarinet ones because I sort of actually catalogued them a while ago.
Yes.
And it's somewhere around about 50.
Yes. I mean, I suppose a lot of them aren't even in print, are they?
No, that's
so
right.
It's very important to have a catalogue and not lose track of where the parts are.
Yeah, that's right. And some of the clarinet ones have sort of disappeared, sadly. But I want to get it all out there, so that if people are interested, they can get in touch with me and either the composer or me, you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Private publishing enterprise coming
Yes,
up then.
that's right. But it's been really interesting sort of journey, because such different styles, and I've been involved in all sorts of different styles of music, and it's rather nice to have this sort of varied repertoire, so different people will be interested in different stuff, and it can sort of disseminate it all, really.
Obviously then bass clarinet for you has been a hugely significant part of your career throughout, hasn't it?
Yeah. Alongside the clarinet as well, the 2 of them together, but the bass clarinet, I just felt it wasn't around. It wasn't a solo instrument.
No.
You know, and I just enjoyed playing the bass clarinet.
Yes.
Simple as that. And when I left the academy, very soon after, Alan got me involved in quite a few things. And some of the things I remember are wonderful little songs by Webern for voice and 2, 3 or 4 instruments. And he always had a bass clarinet in there. Clarinet and bass clarinet, or clarinet, bass clarinet, violin, cello or whatever.
Right.
And Dalla Pickler wrote for E-flat, B-flat and bass clarinet and voice, you know.
Right.
And all these things, I was playing them with Alan. And I was loving playing the bass. And so I sort of really got into the bass clarinet in quite a big way, as well as the clarinet.
Yes.
So it just seemed natural that
Yes,
I
so it
continued.
didn't take over, but it was definitely a hugely important double.
Yeah, because again, very soon after I left the academy, I went off to Holland to the Gaudiamus International Contemporary Music competition, which they have every year. And I took two pieces, and I'd heard of this guy in Holland, and who was a bass clarinet specialist, and his name was Harry Sparnai. And he'd won the Gaudiamus competition, and he only played bass clarinet. And he had started commissioning pieces, so I'd got a couple of these from Holland and took them over there. And he happened to be on the panel for that, and so I played bass clarinet pieces and clarinet pieces, and I did quite well. And I think I sort of came fifth or something. They gave me a little recital over there, and that sort of encouraged me more because I found that he was building up a repertoire. But my bass clarinets were still a bit primitive. They only went down to E flat normally.
Yes.
And so I had it extended down to a D.
Oh, you did?
Yes, wow. Because the E flat clarinet, bass clarinet that I had a vent hole down in the bell.
Yeah.
And when I was playing these Webern pieces, they were low Ds. So if I was very careful, I could get that bone in my ankle into the hole, and it would be a D. It was a bit embarrassing if the audience could see you sort of trying to find that. And then gradually you heard about Selmer's beginning to
go to low C.
Yeah. So I had my
Shostakovich constantly writing for low C.
Yeah, that's right. So I had my bass then extended further down to a low C, and it's still the same instrument. So I think I got a bass clarinet down to low C for about 380 quid, something like that.
Okay.
Rather than
thousands and thousands.
Yeah, and I've still got now. That, you know. Yeah, yes. But that got me really. That repertoire got me appreciating the bass clarinet and its potential.
Yes. And did you find it was fairly secure as an instrument, or were they very prone to leak and
no, it was fine. It's the key work on that instrument, which is now must be 50 years old or something.
Yes.
It's never been wonderful, and the tuning's not been wonderful. But I'm one of these who, the devil you know.
Yes.
And I'm a bit of a Luddite. I hate change because it frightens me in a sense.
Well, and also they become friends, these instruments, don't they? You know all their little quirks and foibles, and you're used to cajoling them to do what you want. Yeah. It's a partnership.
Yeah, that's right. And I did develop it, and I did some broadcasting on the bass, specifically on the bass clarinet, and the Janet Graham 3 pieces broadcast, and the York Bowen quintet for bass clarinet and string quartet. It's a wonderful piece, and it had been an ambition of mine to record it for the Beeb and to record it on CD. And I did it for the Beeb in, I think it was 1988, with the Fairfield Quartet.
Oh yes, what with Julia?
Yes.
Great. And you didn't commission that one?
No, it was
extant.
Yeah, it was written in 1932.
Oh yes, you wouldn't have commissioned
No, just before my time. And Walter Lear broadcast it for the BBC in 1934.
Okay, yes.
And I played in 1988, and I'm pretty sure that Alan, who gave me this or sold me this mouthpiece, said it had belonged to Walter Lear.
All right.
So I think I played on a mouthpiece that not necessarily the same one.
No, had actually played the piece originally.
Yeah. And I did go on to record it for CD as well. Yes. And so that was one of my ambitions ticked.
Brilliant.
But alongside all the bass clarinet stuff, there was a lot of clarinet stuff as well. And but the other big sort of bass clarinet thing, I suppose, was after the academy I went to Goldsmiths to do a part-time BMOS there, and met up with a pianist called John Tilbury, who was teaching piano there and also doing a part-time degree a year ahead of me, I think. but he was wonderfully well known as a top sort of experimental music pianist and great friend of Cornelius Cardew.
All right.
And in, I think it was 1981, Cornelius Cardew was killed in a hit and run accident in East London. And when John, who was probably his closest friend, went through all his stuff and wherever he lived, sort of, it was a bit like Satie, pulled out the piano and saw behind the piano loads of bits of paper and found a piece called Mountains in pencil.
Oh, wow.
For solo bass clarinet.
Oh, cracking.
And it turns out that Cardew and Harish Barnai were on the jury for this Gaudiamus competition where I'd first met Harish Barnai. They were on a competition, on a jury together, and Harry had said to Cardew, what about writing me a piece? And he'd written him a piece, but Harry had never played it.
Right.
And I sort of lost touch with Harry, although we had done some concerts together, and I never asked him about this.
No.
And I think it wasn't his scene.
No.
And he did say, oh, it wasn't finished. But actually it was, and there were 2 or 3 places where in pencil Cardew had scribbled something out and written over the top, D, not E flat, or whatever it might be, you know.
Yes.
But there was this manuscript.
Yes.
So, as I say, John is a very close friend, and that whole area of British experimental music put on a memorial concert for Cardew. And he asked me to play this piece at the QEH. So I walked on to play a solo bass clarinet piece at the QEH to a huge audience. It was a bit of a nerve-wracking thing. It was a set of variations on the Gigue from Bach's 6 keyboard partita.
Yeah.
And it's fiendish.
Yes.
Absolutely fiendish.
Yes.
And I worked at it.
Yes.
And the people in the experimental circle got me to play it quite a lot and did an Arts Council tour performing this.
Wow.
And in a group called AMM that John was in got me playing, and we went off to Turkey and Munich and places, and I played it a lot, this piece, and then recorded that as well. So that also got me recognised in a sort of different neck of the woods from the sort of formal York Bowen kind of stuff for bass clarinet. Yeah. So, it's been quite a journey on the bass.
Yeah. Ian's had such a pioneering career. I wanted to know if this had been mainly with Gemini, or if his work had always been a bit out there, ever since his time as a student at the Royal Academy of Music.
Yeah, well, that was being a student of Alan Hacker, I suppose. But just sort of finishing off the bass clarinet thing, I suppose, pioneering in a way. I did the first solo bass clarinet CD that anyone had done in the UK.
Oh, right. Well, complete Stone Cold solo.
Yeah. And that was quite an exciting thing. That piece, Mountains, was on there, and some, I think, 2 or 3 commissions and some pieces that friends of mine had written for other people in the States. So that was quite a sort of, I was quite proud of that, really. Some quite wild things on there, and also some quite fun things. It was a real repertoire. But yeah, it's just, I mean, it not planned in a sense. The bass clarinet, just to sort of wind up on that, is just something that's always interested me, and I enjoy playing it. And in Gemini, it was the opportunity to put it into chamber music rather than just solo, because, as I'm sure you know, nowadays there are lots and lots of people playing solo bass clarinet stuff all over the world, thanks to Harish Barnai mainly. And a lot of it's a certain kind of repertoire, and it's solo. But I love the idea of bass clarinet in chamber music. Works really well with strings. So a lot of the commissions have been with strings, and perhaps add a saxophone as well, which is really nice. But yeah, Gemini's been a huge part of my life, really. Peter set it up, as I say, in 1974. It was he came to a composer weekend he was just finishing a PhD with a piece for 2 clarinets and 2 percussion. And it was a bit of a hit at the weekend, and the SPNM put it on at the South Bank, and then the BBC recorded it, and the piece was called Gemini.
Oh, I see.
And Peter finished his CD, came down to London and said, I'm going to form a group. I'm going to call it Gemini.
Mm.
How many pieces do you know for 2 clarinets and 2 percussion?
I don't think I know any.
Right. Well, that was everybody's problem. So Peter started developing a repertoire for us.
I see. That was the ensemble.
Yeah.
I see. Yeah, that would be a problem.
Yeah. And so, we did solos and duos and all sorts of things. But
it didn't start out as a mixed chamber ensemble. It started out as 2 clarinets and 2 percussion.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
And
right. Okay.
He commissioned from friends of his for that ensemble, and also we did solos as well. But he arranged some Beatles stuff. I remember we had to go down to a television studio in Bristol, be there for 9 o'clock for some reason to record Beethoven songs for 2 bass clarinets or 2 clarinets or something and percussion. I never quite knew why, but never mind, we did it.
Yes.
Yeah. And alongside the concert work, which was, Peter was very good at getting interesting stuff, he developed a huge education program, and we became pioneers of that, and lots of people came to, if you like, sit at Peter's feet in our workshops, and Gillian Moore, for instance, who became one of the leaders, and various other people would come, and we did workshops all over the place linked to concerts. So we'd go somewhere for a week instead of just going to do a concert on Friday night. We'd be there for the whole week, and we'd do several kids' concerts and workshops, and put kids into our concerts and pieces that they'd written, all sorts of things. And it took off, and lots of interest, and the articles in the, all the music press and such like, and Arts Council grants. And so when Peter left, that was to go and set up a sort of more formal thing at the Guildhall. They wanted to set up a programme with him of training people into all the stuff that he'd been doing. I continued that sort of policy, and we did lots of concerts and things linked to that, workshops, big residencies. We had a 6-week residency on Merseyside, and we did all sorts of things and travelled around. And commissioning all sorts of people for all sorts of events. Small. So
you were doing outreach work before it was really something that the orchestras also did, weren't you? You were out there already. Hard at it.
Yeah, we were the first to do it.
Yes.
And at that time there were regional arts associations who would be happy to employ us to go around doing these things. So very often, even in quite big concerts, we would put a piece we'd been working on with the kids during the week.
Yes.
We'd be putting it into our concert.
With them.
Yeah, so we might go to the Cheltenham Festival or the Bath Festival.
Yes.
And, kids would do things. King's Lynn Festival, I remember we did Beethoven piano sonatas, trios for clarinet, violin and piano, and kids' pieces, all mixed up together,
Lovely.
And that continued for quite a long time. It's all very exciting. And as I say, Arts Council grants. We've got a Greater London Arts grant to have an administrator, which was wonderful. And then when all that dried up, I took on the mantle of trying to run it as well as playing it, which became challenging.
Yes.
Yeah. But alongside that, I still did a lot of clarinet playing as well. Wasn't just bass clarinet. But I got a job at Exeter University as a lecturer, and Gemini became they called it Ensemble in Association. I think for 11 years we were there. And would go down regularly playing composers' pieces, playing more formal concerts, and being quite busy, which was a good link. And we were resident at Bristol University for 8 years. We'd go down every year. Surrey University was for, I don't know, is it something like 10 years? I can't quite remember. We'd go down regularly to do all sorts of things. So we were quite busy. In fact, at one point we were working for 36 weeks of the year, which was really quite something. So that effectively was...
Yeah, I mean, for an avant-garde chamber ensemble of such a weird configuration, that's just unreal, isn't it, in today's terms?
But in fact, quite soon, the repertoire obviously was very limited for two clarinets.
So you opened it out.
It opened out basically to a sort of Piero Lunaire ensemble with percussion, which was the Fires of London and Max Davis, Bertwist, and all that kind of people. And in fact, I'd worked with, through Alan Hacker, with the Piero players, which became the Fires of London, and I worked with him, and so we had repertoire there, and we did quite a lot of Bertwhistle stuff, and expanded in that way. So Peter was very good at commissioning friends, and his PhD supervisor was David Lumsdane, who became a very, very close friend. And in fact, last year we gave a huge 90th birthday concert for him. And his wife, Nicola Lefanu, became a friend, and she's actually the honorary president now of Gemini.
Brilliant.
Brilliant. And so he commissioned friends, which was great, and we kept the friendships going, which was nice for all of us, and very satisfying. And then other sort of students of David Lumsdane became friends of ours, and we commissioned them. So it sort of blossomed for everybody, which was really nice. And I also got involved with, as I say, with all this experimental music stuff, which was a lot of sort of improvising and playing from graphic scores and such like. And that was very different. Take the dots away from you, and you feel very exposed. And you suddenly realise that actually singers, for instance, walk on stage and it's just them. There's no music stand to hide behind. You know? And I found that in one sense liberating. And playing with people like John Tilbury, who was an absolute master improviser, you learned such a lot. And all those people who thought in a very different way from the more formal people. That opened out my musical life quite a lot, doing very different things, and then coming back to perhaps play sort of more formal stuff as well. I felt that I didn't have to think, oh, this is how everybody expects Mozart to be or whatever. Because I played so much new music, the dots in front of me were new. You know, it sounds a bit silly that, but I would try and think, well, this is how I want to play it, not how Jack Brymer had played it, and Gervais Depire and Fred Bloggs and you know, everybody else. Tried to bring something myself. Not always successfully, but I tended to avoid just sort of trying to be in a tradition, in a sense, you know. And I think that was probably Alan Hacker, as you probably know, was a very controversial figure. And I just, inspired by him, not a sort of absolutely sort of manic supporter, but inspired by the fact that he went this way, that way, and I went different ways as well.
And he had his path, and he was jolly well going to follow it.
And I just did different things as well, and I never played in an orchestra, you know, really. But
Right, so Ian, I think you not only work with youngsters, but you work with adults as well. Do you work a lot with adult amateurs?
Yes, do quite a few courses. Benslow in Hitchin a regular.
Wonderful place.
Yes, great. Regular piano and wind, 2 courses actually. But also I did set up a bass clarinet course, which I found very exciting, and for which I commissioned quite a lot of music. And you're only allowed to play bass clarinet. Somebody asked if they could bring the contrabass clarinet, and I said no. Pure bass clarinets.
Wow.
And we would have 16 bass clarinets in the room together. Wonderful sound. You imagine the opening of Finlandia on 16 bass clarinets would be quite something. And I've commissioned pieces. If it's for the whole choir, then in 8 parts, so that two to each part. But also we divide into quartets. So I've also commissioned a few quartets and a couple of trios as well. Just at one point somebody fell ill, so I thought, better have some reserves. So yeah, that was a sort of quite a high point, getting the 16 bass clarinets, and it seemed to sell out every time, which was great. I've now handed it on to Helen Paskins. She's taken it over. She sort of helped me out previously, and I've handed it on to her. Yeah, I did it for long enough, I think. It's quite hard going.
Yes. Oh gosh, I mean, 16 players, and to keep that range of different enthusiasms and standards and interests going, and have everyone still good friends at the end.
Yeah. And I go down to Jackdaws in the West Country near Frome,
Lovely.
which is a lovely little course. Go down there every year.
You're still doing that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So keep that going. Yeah, but it's all sorts of things, and meeting lots of different people is quite interesting. I played in an Albanian folk band for quite some time.
Oh. You're not Albanian.
So a friend of mine, when it was very difficult to get into Albania, there was one of these sort of, I don't quite know who managed these tours, but he went on these tours a couple of times in the 70s, I think it was, and took a little recorder machine and recorded some of this amazing folk music, brought it back, and would transcribe it for us. And we did quite a lot of concerts, festivals, and the Albanian Society in London. It's pretty extreme left-wing, a bit frightening, some of them. However, we used to play at their annual do as well, so that was good fun. Yeah, what else have I done? Oh yes, I toured Stockhausen's Little Harlequin.
Yes. Talk about part. Were you weren't the first to play that, were you?
No.
When did you write that, actually?
I think it's in the mid-70s, something like that. Mid to late 70s, yeah.
Yes.
I toured it in early 80s. Great fun. Did a tour with Steve Montague, composer, and he did a lot of electronics in that gig, and Sue McLennan, most wonderful dancer.
Yes.
And we did this tour where we each did a solo. So I did Harlequin as my big solo. Sue did an unaccompanied dance. Steve did one of his unaccompanied electronic pieces. That was all in the first half. And then the second half, the 3 of us devised a 40-minute piece together from scratch.
What, every night?
No, we went into studio for several days and created it.
Okay, and then you kind of created it on the hoof in workshops, and then you took it out on the road as a complete thing. Yeah,
that was a very exciting time. Yeah, Little Harlequin took me about 6 months to learn.
I'm not surprised.
You have to, every foot movement is a rhythm. It's all written out. It's notated for you, all the rhythms, quite complex rhythms.
Yes.
Every single movement you make is choreographed. So your left arm goes up, your head goes to the left, or whatever it is, all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And you're also playing quite difficult music as well, from memory.
Yes. Well, exactly, because if you're cavorting around a stage doing all these dance movements, you can't be following a music stand.
That's right. Yeah.
Wow.
So that was good fun.
Finally, I wanted to know what advice Ian would have for young players wanting to go into the profession nowadays.
Yeah, I used to do bits of teaching at goldsmiths, and people would send students to me. And then I started teaching clarinet at what originally was Leicester Poly. And then I got a job, part-time job at Exeter University as sort of tutor and then lecturer in performance. So all the performance went through me.
So not just clarinet, but performance as a thing.
Yeah. So I oversaw all the instrumental teachers, arranged the syllabus for performance and everything. Yeah. We had a performance class every Wednesday afternoon. Made them do all sorts of things. Made everybody conduct, which was hilarious.
Yes, very, very wise. Because musicians are good at complaining about conductors, and then when they try and do it themselves, they realise actually not always that easy.
Yeah. And I was there for 11 years. Yeah, the music department was, self-sufficient and lots of exciting things. Very good staff. Phil Grange was on the staff, good friend of mine. And we went on to we've made 3 CDs with him, one of which was CD of the Year. Another one was chosen a couple of years ago as Best Contemporary CD Release in the USA.
Wow.
And we went to Taiwan with him, which was good fun. Yeah, we premiered all sorts of things in Taiwan. We premiered Malcolm Arnold's Sonatina. I'd never heard before. Elgar.
The first ever Taiwanese performance of Malcolm Arnold's Sonatina.
Messiaen Quartet for the End of Time.
Had they not heard that before?
No.
Oh my
They had a very good symphony orchestra, but no chamber music.
No.
So anything we played, pretty well anything we played,
was
first performance.
Wow.
Yeah. One of those little Elgar soiree musicale kind of things that Caroline played, first performance of Elgar, everything we played. Yes, that was a very memorable trip. It was very good. Yeah. And after Exeter closed, which was really miserable, well, overlapping with that, a job came up at what was then Trinity College of Music.
Yes.
Someone alerted me to it, and I applied. And I got the job, and it overlapped with Exeter. So I started in January, but Exeter was closing in the following July. So for a little while I did 2.
Commuting up and down.
Yes.
Wow.
So I started Trinity part-time, then went full-time after I'd finished Exeter.
Yeah.
And was there as head of department, wind, brass and percussion for 7 years.
Right.
And then stayed on for a couple of years just to do a couple of hours a week to see some people through their courses.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I enjoyed a lot of that. Enjoyed the students more than the sort of admin side of it, as you can imagine.
No comment.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it was busy. 42 members of staff, round about 130 to 140 students.
Yes. So did you work for Trinity as it moved from?
It had already moved.
It had already gone to Greenwich, yes.
Yeah.
So you
so
were
I missed
all
sailing down the
yes.
river.
So all the time you were in the Royal Naval College. Yeah.
That's right. Lovely. I mean, I was very lucky because the campus at Exeter is beautiful.
Yes.
Or
okay.
it was. They're now building all over it, apparently. And then to go to Greenwich
yes.
as well. That was lovely.
Not too bad.
Yeah. And then I decided that I'd been there long enough and wanted a bit more time to myself, and did a few recording projects, which I hadn't been able to do because I didn't have the time. So there's some solo stuff and some Gemini stuff, which I did. And just to give myself a bit more space, really.
Well, yes. Because the trouble with doing these very big jobs is you tend to lose touch with the thing which is at the core of your being, which is practicing and performing on your instrument.
Yeah, that's right.
Because it gets eased out, doesn't it? Just with the pressure of stuff.
Yeah. And then I've always done bits of conducting. I did quite a lot of conducting particularly at Trinity Larving, so I set up this sort of wind orchestra and a junior wind orchestra and conducted those, which is great. And Gemini conducted that quite a lot. And now I've just given up the clarinet for various reasons. I couldn't carry on, and still doing a bit of conducting, arm waving as I call it. I'm a clarinetist who conducts rather than a conductor.
Yeah.
I think there's a massive difference.
Yes,
between
well, you
them.
stand an umpire.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So, I think that's about it, really.
Yes. So if I was not me, but an 18-year-old enthusiastic clarinet student about to embark on a college career, apart from go into banking, is there any other advice you'd have for me?
Quite a few years ago, somebody who was doing a master's at, I think it must have been at Goldsmith. He did an undergraduate degree in maths, that's right, at Birmingham, and was really keen on the clarinet and was very good, and came to me as a clarinetist for lessons from Goldsmiths, where he was doing a master's in music. And he said to me, as he was going to finish, he said, "Do you think I should go into the profession or not?" And my answer was, "It is only you who can decide that." I said, "You have to think all the way through all the commitments that there are on doing that or another job. And is it the only thing you want to do? If it's not the only thing you want to do, think very hard about doing it." And I would say that to an 18-year-old. Why are you going in just because you got your grade 8 flute and your parents think, "Oh, that'd be good, why don't you carry on?" And I always used to say that at Trinity in auditions for undergraduate, I'd say to all of them, if I took your instrument away from you and said you can never have it back again, what would you say? Some of them would say, "Oh, I don't know. I suppose I might buy another one." And some would say, "I'd go absolutely mad and I'd fight to get it back." And you think, "Oh, that's the kind of person I want." And it's interesting that, is it the only thing you want to do? And if it's the only thing you want to do, going to conservatoire for 4 years is a huge commitment with no guarantee of anything after that. And I remember one open day, I had my head of brass beside me and all these new recruits, and I said, "How many of you play the trombone?" And I think 4 of them or something like that put their hands up, 4 or 5. And I said to him, "How many orchestras are there in the UK, symphony orchestras?" And he said, I can't remember, 12 or something. I said, "How many trombone players?" He said, "Well, there are 2 and a bass trombone." I said, "All right, so 36. How many vacancies came up last year?" And he said, "None." So I said to these students, "All right, so what are you going to do when you leave?" And I said, "That's what you've got to think about." And you can be a highly successful performer without having to go into an orchestra. And the orchestral world isn't the be-all and end-all. And Trinity Lardman were very good at making people do all sorts of other things, chamber music, music workshops. We said to them, Monday afternoon you might go into local primary school and do some workshop things with little kids, and then the next day you might be called up suddenly by the RPO to play third clarinet or something, and you've got to be able to do it just like that. And the next day you might be rehearsing with your pianist for a recital, or you might be writing letters all in those days, writing letters all day, trying to get work. You've got to be flexible and be able to do all these things at the drop of a hat, and lay it on the line for them. That's what I used to do, and see what their reaction would be. And some of them would really shine, and their determination was wonderful. And there are people who would be, I used to get into college at around about 8:15. There'd be people there, the same people every morning,
already
be there
practicing.
already practicing.
Yes. Yes.
and they did well.
Yes.
And there are others who would sadly drift around having a good time. And there are others, sadly, who couldn't make the rehearsal because their shift at McDonald's, they wouldn't allow them out. And that was a real problem, you know, balancing between having to make money and be a student who's trying to be successful.
I suppose you could say that about being in the profession these days, that you've got to balance actually making enough money to pay your bills with being a musician, because the two don't necessarily
That's right.
tick the same box.
Yeah. And there are some people, there's a flute player. She was a really good flute player, and we gave her an incredibly high mark for her masters. Sue Thomas, co-principal, I think she still is in the LPO, on the panel. And she was just gobsmacked. It was a wonderful recital. And she went off and she did very well in the Overseas League and one or two other competitions. She got one of these Park Lane Group Young Artist things. And was doing, she'd send round, she was doing a music club date here, then didn't hear from her. She'd gone off to Germany. I'm not quite sure why, but she'd developed something to do with flute and electronics, and met up with some people who knew all about all this stuff. And she was developing new repertoire and composing things herself, and decided that, because I met her at John Wolfe, did you know him?
Yes.
Well, met her at his memorial concert, and she played there. And she said, just being around trying to make a living in England as a flute player. You know, there are so many really good flute players around, really good flute players.
Yes.
And she went off, and her career is doing very well, but it's over there
not
rather
here.
than there.
No.
And she's very happy, enjoying herself.
Yes. Well, she's valued and busy, and that's what we all want.
That's right. But she was a good example of somebody who, you know, if you took the flute away from her, she'd probably go and jump in the Thames.
It's her life.
Yeah, that's what you want. That's what you need. Otherwise, you'll not get through, and you'll start feeling, oh God.
There are so many knocks, aren't there, along the way, that you've got to be pretty resilient to bounce back from some of them.
Yeah, and you know, some people say you're only as good as your last concert. I'm not convinced about that, because everybody has a bad day.
Yes.
You know, you might be a footballer in the top team and you play an own goal, but you've got to come out the next week.
Miss a penalty.
Yes, absolutely.
Ian and I could have gone on talking for ages, and it was so fascinating hearing all his anecdotes and all his experiences as a clarinet player. But we felt we'd probably got enough. So the Clarinet and Saxophone Society wanted an outro, if you like. So here's what Ian wrote to wind off. After leaving Trinity Laban in 2014, there were lots of projects. I was able at last to finish off my list of recordings that I had never found the time for, both solo and with Gemini. I also went off to New York with my bass clarinet to record the music for a surrealist film. Both music and film were by Carlos Dengler, former bass player with Interpol. It turned out I was completely solo throughout. The music was either semi-written by Carlos and worked up during the sessions, or discussed, then improvised to scenes from the film. Such things are no more now, as I've had to give up playing. However, I'll be waving my arms about for some of the works on Gemini's next CD, tutoring on courses at Benslow and Jackdaws, hoping to get some of the works I have commissioned over the years out there for others to take up, possibly doing a bit more writing, perhaps even managing to go to the theatre. Oh, and I'd like to get my 5K and 10K times quicker.